Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, June 5th, 2020, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research Channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. All right, guys, well, I'm going to continue in my series looking into accounts of the quote unquote giants or large hominids, as I like to call them, state by state. And next up is Alaska. And I bet you didn't know there were giants in Alaska, but there are. And not only do they have giants in Alaska, they evidently have these rather unusual stone built constructions there. This one they're calling a cairn. So they have some professional, quote unquote, professional academics here, anthropologists and archaeologists looking into these things. And here's one of them here, this whole construction here, but they probably can't identify it properly. And to be honest with you, there's only a handful of people, okay, who are expert in identifying these stone constructions properly, okay? And you're listening to one of them right now. Besides guys like Tim McSweeney and Matt Adams, all right, celebrating the stone landscapes of the northeastern North America and investigating the stone constructions. And also Glenn Kreisberg from archaeoastronomy. I also belong to his. He's also one of these people. So there's literally a handful of people. Jimmy the Paleo Mountain Man, another guy, and probably some of the people that are following this through my channel or these other Facebook pages, maybe. But there's only a handful of people that are living today who can properly identify these things. I can't see enough of the by the pictures I can see here. It's not enough of it for me to get a proper assessment of this thing, but it could very well be an effigy. Or there could be several effigies here. If his thing's been disturbed, undisturbed, I don't know, but it could very well be an effigy. And if it is, it would take somebody like me or Jimmy or Tim or Matt or Glenn to assess this thing properly. And these people here, they're not qualified to do that. I hate to tell you. It's the way it goes in the real world, folks. Okay, so let's get to Alaska here, and we have some very interesting accounts here. And just for anybody's information, I'm working with some new equipment, new laptop, new software, new phone, new everything here. So hopefully the production value of these videos will be a little bit better. I have to play with the software to see what it can do, but for right now, we're dealing with some better stuff, folks. So I was able to pull together some scratch, even though I'm not working right now, and things are pretty tough on me. But I had to do it because my old computer was my old laptop was just shot. Took a beating. I have to say that, lasted 2 years. That's a long time for a laptop that gets used as much as my laptop got used. So it's done. We got some new stuff now. Yay. So let's see how this works out. Alrighty then. So 7-foot skeleton giants in Alaska. And Alaska was a place that Alice Herdliska, who is I guess the head of the Bureau of Ethnology for the Smithsonian for many years, was there doing some archaeology of his own. Unfortunately, he dug up some of the people who were buried quite recently up there, and the native peoples of the areas where he was doing these excavations got very angry at him. This was that jerk Alice Herdlischka that set back archaeology and buried the accounts of the giants as well. And many of the people who worked under him thought he was a class A jerk. So, skeletons of giants in Alaska, ancient cemetery uncovered in the Atlatls Gold District. Special dispatch to the call. Vancouver. James L. Perkinson, an American miner of Atlatl, arrived here today with news of the finding of a number of skeletons in an ancient Indian cemetery in the north, which is of startling scientific interest. Ferguson is one of the owners of the Yellow Jacket, a rich claim which is supposed to be the fountainhead of Pine, the principal creek in Atlatl District. 2 weeks ago, the first excavations were being made for a new tunnel on the property, and what appears to have been an old Indian burial ground was opened up. 5 skeletons, nearly complete, were exhumed, and each is the set of bones that belong to a giant of prehistoric times. Giant. One of the skeletons measures over 7 feet in length, so that the man must have been considerably over that height. Then there were two others of within an inch of 7 feet, and the remaining two were more than 6 feet in length, and the men were of gigantic frame. And okay, some people will say, the naysayers, well, 6 feet and blah, blah, blah. That's not so big. All right, again, I don't want to go through it again because I constantly have to on a channel with whoever might be viewing here. We know that the average height for people 1800 and prior to 1800 were of particularly short stature. So anybody 6 feet tall or better would be somebody of unusual height at that time. You can't compare it to today's standards because we've grown in height by some 10 centimeters, which is certainly isn't a lot. And average height today is some 5.79, 5 foot 7.9 inches. Okay, so that's not even, we're sort of getting closer to 6 foot, but not much at 5.79. Okay. So don't listen to them when they try to minimize it and say slightly more robust, like the Humboldt Museum with the Lovelock Cave artifacts and their ridiculous euphemism, which is nonsense. Slightly more robust, technical terms, which basically means bigger in size. But they don't like to say bigger in size because, all the religious people are going to get crazy because, it's just confirming the Bible and all this kind of stuff. And, hey, whether you believe in, if you're religious or not and believe in the Bible or not, doesn't really matter. You can't dismiss it on those grounds, solely on those grounds. Okay, so how about the people who believe it, who are not religious? How are you going to, justify it, by calling them religious nuts? They're not. The altitude is high and the ground was half frozen so that the bones were preserved almost intact. High ground, like where these cairns were found. It's just funny that many of the reports of the giant hominids and humanoids and large hominids in the Northeast, where all the stone walls were built, just like where these cairns were built in the high altitude. Ferguson says he expects if they had kept on digging, they would have found many more, as these were lying comparatively close together. The bones of the fingers and the toes had crumbled away, but the finger of one skeleton hand was sufficiently strong to hold a ring of what appears to be lead or some similar base metal. Okay, so let's say it was lead. We have evidences of these ancient peoples smelting lead and other metals, including creating alloys of bronze and brass out of copper and tin, etc. These people were well versed in metallurgy, going for including iron as well. There's evidences of that in the Americas as well. Okay. Some of these evidences are mainstream. They're not just old accounts and whatnot, but there was evidences of some kind of smelting going on in Galena Canyon. There just wasn't any gold there, so what were they smelting? And not much copper either. So, but I would think they would find, iron around somewhere. They have to dig for it, but okay. So it had a ring of lead or some other sort of metal there. The skeletons were unusually well formed, but one unique feature was that the arms were several inches shorter than ordinarily appears, while the size of the bones of the forearm was enormous in comparison to the usual models. Okay, so, just more testimony to these humanoids, not necessarily large hominids. I know I say large hominids all the time, but let's say they're not. Let's say they're humanoid. Okay, that's not exactly the same thing. Doesn't necessarily speak to some common ancestor or not. Okay, so there's other animal species on the planet which seem very similar, but don't have a common, ancestor. They completely isolated in their development. Okay, so just again, we see here tales of the giants with horns, tails, other anomalous physical features, extra molars in the jaws, blah blah blah. So, look, I hope you're getting a picture of the past that includes a whole variety of weird kind of characters, almost like Tolkien's Hobbit and like Star Wars, aliens in a bar room there. Besides, two of the skeletons were spears, rudely shaped with a soft metal and pointed with sharp stones. The spears were only about 3 feet long and 5 inches thick at the top, tapering at the lower end. The top contained a socket into which a wooden shaft was probably placed in order to wield the big piece of metal. Okay, so maybe, or what they might be talking about, which was a common weapon found back then, is these rather short spears that have notched ends called atlatls. Okay, and this is very common to find with even the more modern native peoples. Okay, all up and down the Americas. Okay, it's a type of sling spear. All right, with a notch in its end, shaft like almost like an arrow. This one you see is like an arrow, but it's more, lengthy, like a spear, but not quite a full spear. But these are extremely more accurate, A, and B, the speed is quite high. You can generate more speed by slinging it this way than by throwing it by hand. Okay. And the ones they're talking about are all metal. So what would they weigh? Okay. Probably weighed quite a bit. All right. But what they're probably talking about, from what I know of it and my studying this subject and the native peoples, okay, and atlatl, but metal atlatls, okay. They don't say what kind of metal either. Okay, so other pieces of stone and carved metal were found. The general physical appearance of the skeletons, according to the cursory examination of the miners, was similar to that of the Indians of the present day. They were certainly of the flathead type of the present northern tribes. that the burying place is of an ancient origin is evidenced by the fact that the Indians say none of their tribesmen have lived within 50 miles of this place as far back as stories have been handed down. There are several mounds in Alaska, presumably made by the Indians in the vicinity of the new mine tunnel now being extended. Okay, so you have mounds, 3 foot metal spheres, giant skull remains. Okay, so we're starting with the picture of Alaska here and the sort of unusual things found there. And as far as them associating them by the skull, the anatomical features of the skeletal remains to the native peoples, the flatheads. Okay, the flathead Indians who are said to practice artificial cranial deformation, although, as the history goes, and I've researched it, okay, the flatheads, the modern flathead Indians, up into, as far back as we can record them, didn't practice the cranial deformations. It seems rather odd if this was such a holy ceremonial thing for them that they would just stop doing it, you know, for no particular reason. It really begs credulity that they would do that, stop practicing that. Even other Native American tribes do all their dancing and singing and songs and mythology and tales and everything. Why would they stop doing it? Okay. They're drawing those conclusions by the name of the tribe, okay, and by the the skeletal remains found in those areas. Okay, so here's some of the flatheads. Most of them, in these modern pictures of them, don't have these cranial deformations, but here's some skulls, some ancient skulls dug up from the area, and they clearly have this sort of brachycephalic features here. But again, what they call brachycephalic may be natural, and they're only saying it because they can't explain it, and there's not supposed to be all these other hominid types according to them, so there can't be that. They have some pictures of these people with the elongated heads, but again, the history shows that the modern ones didn't do it for some reason, yet they were called the flatheads. So and it remains dug up in the area with these elongated skulls, these brachycephalic skulls. All right, who's to say brachycephalic isn't natural? Okay, how would you tell if a skull formed naturally that resembled the skull that supposedly was caused by artificial cranial deformation? If one formed naturally that way, how would you be able to tell the difference? You wouldn't. It seems it just so happens so many times so far that we talk about this thing. It's genetic. It's not artificial. I think this is another article of the same account, but they say different things in here, so let me read it to you. Skeletons of giants found in Alaska. Skeletons of giants found in Alaska, Vancouver, BC. James Ferguson, owner of the famous Yellow Jacket mine in Atlatls, has another story to tell of his mine, almost as marvelous as that about the rich vein of gold struck in the Yellow Jacket, which is said to have been the richest stringer uh, pocket ever found in the province. His story is to the effect that while tunneling his mine, he unearthed the skull of a human being, which seemed to be larger and flatter than any he had read about. And his curiosity being aroused, he investigated the ground about his claim and found his mine was located in an ancient burying ground. After some pains, he unearthed two complete skeletons, one measuring 7 feet and the other 6 feet 10 inches in length. Parkinson believes that his find proves that there was a race of giants in that northern latitude contemporary with the Mammoth Age. The skeletons were well preserved in the frozen ground and will be brought to civilization next summer. There were already there were extreme I can't read that. There were curiously shaped bones and sharpened stones found in the graves with the Indians. So unusual things that they can't identify found with these skeletal remains is hardly surprising, as we know from many accounts. They find these things. It's Evening Bulletin 1900. They find these artifacts and other stone implements in the burials of the native peoples, the ancient native peoples here, and these giants and whatnot, and they can't explain what these artifacts are. They have no idea what their uses were or their purposes were. So, just very interesting. Grave of a 7-foot giant Aleutian. The Aleutian Islands extend from Alaska across the Bering Strait. One of the skeletons that was found was over 7 feet tall in life. 6 skeletons were found on a low ridge overlooking the ocean. There were 6 total whose heads were to the center with their feet outward, like a group of warriors would do if expecting an attack. This helps to prevent an animal from carrying one of the warriors off or from getting the throat slit by an enemy. Whichever it is, obvious that he was a warrior. Ivory ornaments and weapons made from polished slate were found with the skeletons. The other 5 skeletons were female and of a good height. These were all found during an excavation of a military base found by Major E. Chittenden of Kearney, Nebraska. Okay, so this is 1944, so well into the 20th century, Fritz Zimmerman. And very interesting, this polished slate was found, these ivory ornaments, and, love to see these things because the more artifacts that were lost and we could never see is certainly taking away from our understanding of these people who lived in the ancient past and what we can make of them and what they had in their history, because we obviously don't know what their history is. We know what the native peoples of North America up to a certain point, but often the native peoples talked about all of these people that were there before them that they don't know anything about. So there's some missing continuity there, and that missing continuity, in my estimate, is because of these great catastrophes that happened in between. And at that point, history stopped happening until the human race could get itself back together again. And whatever became of these large hominids and humanoids got absorbed up into the various tribes throughout the whole world. I bet you every human being on the planet has giant DNA in them. It's just in recess. Unless the gravity suddenly changes something like that, it's kind of good to know that we can readapt back into being giants again if suddenly the gravity lessened or something like that. Hey, you never know. But it's conceivable, but we would be able to adapt better than other animal species that didn't experience that in their recessive genes. Island of Shemya, Alaska. Ivan G. Sanderson, a well known zoologist and frequent guest on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show in the 1960s, usually with an exotic animal with a pangolin or a lemur, once related a story about a letter he received regarding an engineer who was stationed on the Aleutian island of Shemya during World War II. While building an airstrip, his crew bulldozed a group of hills, mounds, and discovered under several sedimentary layers what appeared to be human remains. The Alaskan mound was in fact a graveyard of gigantic human remains consisting of crania and long leg bones. The crania measured from 22 to 24 inches from base to crown. That's unbelievable. Big. Okay. Since an adult skull normally measures about 8 inches from back to front, such a large cranium would imply an immense size for a normally proportioned human. Furthermore, every skull was said to have been neatly trepaned, a process of cutting a hole in the upper portion of the skull. So they trepanated these people that are operating on them. In fact, the habit of flattening the skull of an infant and forcing it to grow in an elongated shape was a practice used by ancient Peruvians, the Maya, and the Flathead Indians of Montana. They say they only have implied evidence of this, okay? Because they assumed that because the remains they dug up from the area, they assumed were the ancestors of the Flathead Indians, but who's to say they were artificial cranial deformation? Nobody does. Sanderson tried to gather further proof, eventually receiving a letter from another member of the unit who confirmed the report. The letters both indicated that the Smithsonian Institution had collected the remains, yet nothing else was heard. Okay, and they go down here and they go a little bit further. Okay, so okay, saw that. Sanderson seemed convinced that the Smithsonian Institution had received the bizarre relics, but wondered why they would not release the data. He asked, is it that these people cannot face rewriting all the textbooks? In fact, the habit of flattening the skull of an infant and forcing it to grow in an elongated shape. Okay, they're saying the same thing over again. I don't know why again and again and again, but they keep saying these things. Yes, they might have been practiced by the Mayans and Peruvians or whatever, but they were emulating some people that came in the past that that particular physical feature of the skull and the skeletal proportions there, the skeletal anatomy, um, were all elongated and natural. 1940s, it says this is from. So, okay, again, to well into the 20th century, and this guy is getting a report in the 1960s here from an old report. Noatox, a giant race. So this is an interesting story that they tell here about these particular kind of Eskimos here, but they only briefly mention in it, and they go on to talk about the the anthropology and sort of sociology of the Eskimos that lived up there, but they only mentioned the giant Eskimos here, these Nuatoks, briefly. Don't say much about them, and then they go to sort of talk about how the Eskimos act, which are not these people. They're just a third one. It is a popular belief that the Eskimo or Esquimaux, whichever you please, are Indians, but it is quite as likely that they are Mongolians. Ensign Roger Wells, U.S. Navy, who has recently visited a great many news facts which are of interest, and from his report, the following article has been condensed. Three types are observable among the Eskimo of Alaska. First are the tall, cadaverous natives on the Kotzebue Soup who live on fish, ptarmigans, and marmots. They always look hungry, and in fact, they always are. So here's talk of tall people, but not particularly giant, but taller people. It's rather unusual for these people, most of them. Then there is this, the first ones. Then there is the tall, strongly knit type of the Noatoks, a gigantic race of a splendid physique. Okay, so they're probably more robust, bigger in size in their bones and their whole overall physique. That would be remarkable in any part of the world. Rugged as the mountains among which they live, vigorous and courageous, they stop at nothing but the impossible to accomplish a desired end. Their food supply is the reindeer, mountain sheep, ptarmigans, and fish. So those are the Noatox people. Okay, second type. The third type is the short, stumpy one, probably that of the old Eskimo before the admixture with the southern tribes, now found on the Arctic coast. Whale, seal, and deer meat are their food staples. Okay, so, and then they go on to talk about the Eskimos, the third type, not these other types here. So I'm not going to read to you about these other Eskimos, but without taking a full examination of the practices of the Noatoks relative to other Eskimo tribes, how would we possibly know how they are, similar in ways or dissimilar? I don't know, but they only talk about the Eskimos in general in the rest of this article, make no other mention of these people. So, in any case, guys, that's it for the accounts in Alaska. But there are also these giant skeletal remains to be found, mounds, metal weapons of the various types, metals of different varieties, um, stone constructions there in these areas. They're measuring, the article I showed you is that they're taking lichen specimens from off of these things to try to determine when they might have been constructed, some thousands and thousands of years ago, and have no relationship to any of the Eskimo peoples living there today. It's a completely different race of people, obviously taller in stature, and again, giants to be found in Alaska. So just about every state now we find giants in, if not with few exceptions or a couple of exceptions, where just stories of giant and large native tribes living in those areas. But I thought it was interesting, guys, to find these things in Alaska. It's just hardly surprising that we can find these things all up and down the West Coast there. But after I get done with the next couple of videos in my giant series, because we're up to the end here, we're going to do Hawaii soon. We're going to talk about a couple of other states before we go international. And of course, we're going to talk about Canada and the quote unquote giants or large hominids too. So that's coming up real soon. So, anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Please hit the like button, and I'll be coming out with a new video for you very, very soon. Okay, guys? Anyway, Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.